Welcome to the Level 2 training module for Appendix D, Specialty Electronics Reuse, which explains the fundamentals of this section in greater detail. While the intention of this training module is to increase understanding of R2 requirements, it is not intended to be used as a standalone guide. For the official text of all R2 requirements, download the R2 v3 standard from the SERI website. In addition to the mandatory R2 core requirements covered in Section 1 of the R2 v3 standard, Section 2 of the standard details the R2 process requirements in Appendices A through E. The process requirements relate to specific R2 activities that often require specialized processes and expertise to undertake. Because not all R2 facilities engage or specialize in the same activities, the process requirements in the standard apply only to those facilities that undertake the activities covered under each appendix. Appendix D details the requirements for the verification of specialty electronics for reuse, where full functionality testing of the equipment is not possible. These requirements apply to R2 facilities that specialize in the management of highly sophisticated and specialized electronic equipment. The general principle for Appendix D is to allow for the legitimate reuse of untested specialty electronics, which often require sophisticated test equipment and simulations to test functionality, and often cannot be tested by specialty electronics refurbishers. When the R2 standard refers to specialty electronics, it means rare items that are not intended for consumer use and generally not available in retail. This typically includes industrial, commercial, or scientific equipment, such as medical or large telecom equipment. Because specialty electronics are not easily tested and often require sophisticated testing equipment or simulations in order to test for functionality, the R2 standard includes special requirements to enable the verification and reuse of this type of equipment. Keep in mind that Appendix D is for facilities whose operations focus on the specialty electronics market as a core part of their business. They have expertise in managing specialty electronics and test and repair of any devices where possible. Facilities that only have occasional sales of specialty equipment would likely fall under the 1% requirement in TOR 6 and would not be required to certify to Appendix D. Appendix D is divided into four main areas: quality management system, verification requirements, storage requirements, and sales requirements. These key areas are key to ensuring that specialty equipment that cannot be tested can still be legitimately reused under controlled conditions where equipment is verified and specific customer communications are in place. First, to certify to Appendix D, an R2 facility must also maintain certification to Appendix C, Test and Repair. As part of Appendix C, a facility is required to maintain certification to a quality management system. The options for this are ISO 9001 or the RIOS standard, which is a single standard combining requirements for environmental protection, health and safety, and quality. Certification to Appendix C, Test and Repair, requires an R2 facility to have the capability to test and repair some portion of the equipment and components it receives. Only when the facility does not have the technical capability to test a specialty electronics device can the Appendix D verification process be used. Let's take a look at the verification requirements. Verification begins with the facility confirming and documenting from the prior user that the specialty equipment is in good working order, with no known defects. This requires that the facility first be in contact with the prior user and work proactively with the prior user to record the working condition of the equipment. Once the equipment is ready for visual verification, a qualified technician is required to inspect the equipment to ensure it's physically sound, with no damage, defects, or missing parts. In addition, the technician must check to see whether the equipment's serial numbers or other identifiers are accurate. The last part of the verification process is to ensure the equipment has been sanitized or is not capable of storing data. If the sanitization was conducted by the source, it has to be carried out in accordance with Appendix B. This requirement is important to implement prior to taking control of the device, since many devices would have to be logically sanitized prior to removing them from service. The facility must provide evidence that Appendix B was followed during the sanitization process. There are two outcomes from this verification process: a failure or a pass. If the equipment fails verification, the facility can harvest the reusable parts and verify them in accordance with this Appendix D. Alternatively, for parts and components that are not harvested, the facility must evaluate and sort the items in accordance with Core Requirement 6 to determine the next appropriate R2 process, such as materials recovery. If the equipment passes all verifications, each unit must be identified with a unique number for tracking purposes, handled to protect it from damage, labeled with the R2 facility's name and contact information for returns, and identified with the F2 category from the R2 equipment categorization document, or an equivalent category as specified in the rec. Once the specialty equipment is verified, it can be stored indefinitely, as long as it continues to have a positive value and a market for reuse. Any items that do not have a positive value would need to be reassessed in accordance with Core Requirement 6 to determine the next appropriate R2 process. Because the specialty electronics managed under Appendix D are only verified and not tested, there are additional requirements governing the sale of these products to customers. This ensures transparency and responsible management of equipment. Sales must be limited to a customer's request for a specific part number or other unique identifier for the equipment. This is to ensure there is a need and end use for the particular piece of equipment being sold. And for traceability purposes, the unique part or identifying number must be listed on the sales record. This part number can then be linked back to the verification records as well as used for warranty tracking purposes. In addition to recording the unique item number on the sales record, the following items must be defined in the purchase order with the customer. Disclose to the buyer that the equipment was inspected but not tested. The customer accepts the equipment without testing. Customer will return all equipment that is not working for a refund. Customer will only sell equipment to an end user, and, upon request, the customer will provide records demonstrating the equipment was sold to an end user, and they will accept returns of the equipment for any reason at no charge, and also offer no charge return for recycling. These strict terms and conditions ensure that the customer will meet the same sales requirements as the R2 facility as specified in this appendix. To summarize, when functionality testing is not possible, specialty equipment can be managed under the controls of Appendix D to extend the reusable life of the equipment when possible. Processors of specialty electronics are required to maintain detailed verification and tracking processes to ensure that specialty equipment entering the reuse market remains viable for years to come. For more information about the R2v3 standard, visit the R2 knowledge base on the SERI website.